Hi, I'm Scott Robinson, Director of the REIT Center at NYU's SPS Schack Institute of Real Estate. I am fortunate to be co-hosting the 7-part REIT leadership series with my friend and industry colleague, Robin Panovka. Robin co-chairs Wachtell Lipton's real estate and REIT M&A practice with Adam Emmerich, both of whom have long supported the Schack Institute of Real Estate, notably as conference co-chairs of our annual REIT symposium held every spring in New York City. For more than 50 years, the Schack Institute has been at the forefront of real estate education, guiding over 700 matriculated students annually through numerous non-credit and degree programs, including a Bachelor of Science in Real Estate, Real Estate, MS Development, and MS Construction Management. This REIT Leadership Series was designed to bring our students and numerous stakeholders into a direct conversation with some of the folks shaping our industry today, including Jay Brown of Crown Castle International, Tom Bartlett of American Tower, Aaron Block of Metaprop, Eric Bolton, Mid-America Apartment Communities, Stuart Tanz, Retail Opportunity Investments, Tammy Jones, Basis Investment Group, and Mike Landy, former CEO of Monmouth Real Estate Investment Corp. Importantly, I want to thank the many NYU Schack students who participated in this series and leaned in to prepare accompanying research around the conversations, including Ivan Chen, Emma Denhausen-Braun, Sam Penny, Jacob Bernstein, Ross Hewitt, and Cameron Spiller. Thank you. The topics of conversation among the CEOs in this leadership series are generally focused on each individual company's strategy, but I hope you'll see that they can also be categorized into major themes such as digital infrastructure, leadership, M&A, and specific industry trends. I hope you find these conversations and the related research memos informative, and I look forward to exploring these topics with you further on social media in the coming months.
Okay, it's a real pleasure to welcome Jay Brown to our NYU Distinguished Speaker Seminar Series. Thank you, Jay, for joining us. As you all know from the bio and other materials that we've distributed, Jay is President and CEO of Crown Castle International, one of the largest and most successful REITs in the US, with a market cap of about 84 billion and enterprise value of 110 billion. Crown Castle is the nation's largest provider of shared communications infrastructure with more than 40,000 cell towers, 115,000 on air or under contract small cell nodes, and more than 80,000 route miles of fiber. We're very excited to have Jay with us for many reasons, but especially because we've heard from many of our students that there's a real desire to understand the digital infrastructure real estate world, the digital REITs like the Tower REITs, which one of which Jay runs. We've got one of our students, Ivan Chen, who's going to join later in the program and ask some questions from the students' perspective. So Jay, if we might, let's dive in. You just finished your Q1 earnings call, and I think it's fair to say the results were very exciting and just as interesting. I think you expressed tremendous optimism about where your business is going. I think you said you had the best tower leasing activity you've had last year. You had the best tower leasing activity you've ever had in the company's history. What's driving that growth and what's driving the optimism?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Robin. It's great to be here with you again. The big driver is what we're all using our devices for, our phones, our tablets. That's the underlying driver for the infrastructure that we own. The more people use those devices, the more people want them to be ubiquitous in every corner of the United States, the more our infrastructure is needed. What we do is provide access to the wireless carriers so that they can put electronics and equipments in order to make our cell phones work and operate at the levels that we expect. So as much as we're using them, that growth in underlying data traffic is the big driver of our business. And we've seen a big increase in activity and revenue growth in 2021. And as you correctly mentioned, into 2022. That's primarily driven by the wireless operators building out their 5G networks.
Are you expecting a reduction in demand as people go back to the office, start living and working less remotely?
I don't think so. I think we'll continue to see the growth in wireless. The most recent statistics on 5G enabled devices, some of the new iPhones are 5G enabled, some of the Samsung devices are 5G enabled. And people who have a 5G handset device are using those devices about 30 to 40% more than devices that are not enabled with 5G. They're 4G or 3G enabled devices. So as the speed of the device increases, particularly around applications like video related applications, they get used more. And so I don't think that's a phenomenon of the pandemic. And so I think as people go back to the office, we'll continue to see usage rates at really high levels.
Yeah, I must say, I'm sitting in the office, but I use my iPhone more than my landline now, even in the office. So I think I'm a believer. Longer term, though, how long does it take to roll out 5G? How much, in terms of just your towers, what does that really mean for rental of space? And what happens after 5G?
Well, it'll probably take the better part of a decade, maybe a little bit longer, for 5G to be completely rolled out in the US. In calendar year 2022, the last vestiges of 3G are just being turned off, and that equipment is moving towards 4G or 5G. And it's been more than a decade since 3G equipment was deployed. So the cycles are relatively long, and the equipment stays for a long period of time. So it'll probably take better part of a decade. And what's next after that is 6G, which the standards have already been set, and people are already starting to think about the uses of that. The big differences between 4G and 5G are three things. One is the latency in the network, which is how long does it take for the network to respond when we as users click on something? How quickly do we get a response back? The latency is inside of 10 milliseconds in 5G, which is much faster than 4G. The second thing is that it's faster, which is what we're all familiar with in terms of we're used to, as generations of the technology increase, the speed gets faster. So 5G is certainly faster than 4G. In fact, it will be as fast for people around the country if they have a cable modem in their house and they're getting internet access through their cable, even if it's fiber enabled. 5G will be as fast as any wired connection into the home. So it's faster. But the big, really game-changing from an industry standpoint that's different is that 5G enables more devices to be connected simultaneously. In the current 4G world, simultaneous connections are limited to about 2,000 devices inside a relatively small geographic area. And you see that as a user when you look down at your phone and you have 5 bars, so there's coverage, you see the network, but you still get that spinning wheel of death. That's the network is full. All the devices, all the connections that are available in the network have been taken up. In 5G, it enables there to be 10,000 times more connections. So if there's 2,000 in a given area, we may be at 2 million or more connections that are enabled over that same geography, which enables our customers to be able to have more revenue sources and be able to sell wireless network to more devices that are going to likely have relatively low usage compared to an iPhone, but still it'll enable more things to be connected, like wearables, clothing, healthcare devices, industrial applications. So that's the big change that's coming that we'll see as consumers, but that's going to take a decade in order to accomplish.
So based on that, you see runway for a decade of growth as more and more gets unrolled and the carriers need more and more space on your towers. Is that
That's right. We see good organic growth in the business. So one of the things that's unique about our assets relative to more traditional real estate is that if you thought about physical capacity of the asset, we're probably only leasing about 40 to 45% of the capacity of the network. We don't have to get to 85 to 90% capacity in order to be profitable. At 40 to 45% of capacity, we have about a 10% yield on existing assets today, and all of that capacity to go. And the growth in our business is not pricing, meaning a tenant leaves and we put a new tenant on at a higher price, but true organic lease up happens in our business. So we've talked about the dividend. that we're growing 7 to 8% per year per annum. Over the last 3 years, we've grown at north of 10%, but we've been in that long-term range of trying to grow the dividend 7 to 8%. Almost all of that is driven by organic growth on existing assets. We're building new assets and expanding the network, but the vast majority of the growth, in terms of the growth in dividend, is just organic growth on existing assets.
So looking just at one tower, are you saying that many of your towers could double the number of equipment, dishes, et cetera, on them? There's literally that much empty space.
Exactly right. That's exactly right. That's exactly the right way to think about it.
Wow.
It's almost like an office building that's half full, but it already has a return on equity. Very different than the more traditional space, traditional real estate.
So explain why you also have this fiber optic cable network and these small servers.
Yeah, they're components of the wireless network. So if you were to take an analogy, you can see the lights up there in my office. That provides broad coverage. Those are like towers. Broad coverage, cover a lot of area. And you use area lamps to bring light to a specific location. Like if you're sitting and reading a book and you want to put a lot of light on that book, you use a lamp. Small cells are like lamps. They cover a really small concentrated area. They're connected by fiber. It's how the network works. And towers cover big geographies. So in areas in the country where there's a lot of dense population, we use a combination of towers and small cells in order to meet the capacity needs as people congregate and data usage goes up. We go in and put small cells in order to offload traffic off of towers and put it onto small cells, and it makes the entire network run more efficiently. From an economic standpoint, all three of those assets are basically operated the same way. We have capacity, we lease the space on the assets, and we see incremental returns, increasing the yield as we add additional revenues and therefore cash flows to the assets. The model, similar to an office building, we have very little additional operating expense as we add a new tenant. Most of the operating expense is embedded in the asset when we build it for the first tenant. And then after that, the incremental revenues come at very high incremental margins drop to the bottom line.
So from a pure real estate perspective, how does this work? Do you have a separate lease for each tower, each small cell, each fiber optic line, or do you have one contract with AT&T that covers the country?
Every asset has a specific lease associated with it where it gives them specific rights to space on the tower, space on the ground, how much equipment, how much load they can put onto the tower, how much weight they can put onto the tower, the size of the antennas, the type of brackets and mounts that they use. So it's very specific to an individual asset. The same thing is true with small cells and with fiber. We're in essence, in order to be what is commonly or colloquially referred to as good REIT revenue, we have to be providing an asset and not providing really services associated with that. So we're not a service provider per se to the wireless industry. What we do is we provide the pipe, we provide the access, we're providing the real estate, and they're coming in leasing from us a particular amount of access, whether it's access to fiber optic, access to a small cell, access to a tower with defined space around it, and we're providing that to them. And then the services, the technology that they put across that will vary by customer, but what they're leasing from us is space, which is why it's good REIT income.
And the leases are based on usage, or it's just a fixed rent with some escalators or something like that?
It's based on the usage of space. So it's not a co-share revenue kind of model, and it's not a toll booth in terms of the amount of bits that go across the network. It's the real estate that they're securing in order to put up their antennas and their lines in order to be able to broadcast. So our growth driver, the tailwind that we have in the business, is absolutely the growth in minutes of use, which require additional equipment to be used in the network. but we don't have a direct correlation. We don't get more revenue as a business when the carriers or we as consumers use more data in the network. What it does is it creates a need for additional space on our infrastructure as the carriers need to deploy more equipment. And so if you were to take an individual asset, like you were asking the question about an individual asset, we don't grow linearly directly correlated to the growth in minutes of use. Our growth in revenues would be more stair-stepped. So as minutes of use increase, they may add additional lines and antennas to a site. They may put up additional equipment in order to handle an elevated amount of data. And that would create capacity for their network that then they would grow until they got to a certain level, and then they'd have to add more equipment.
Got it. So your website also talks about edge computing and CBRE. How does that fit into the business model?
Yeah, edge computing is really important in kind of next generation activity. So one of the unique things, I'll make a practical application of what could 5G do that you can't do with 4G. Probably many of the students have used things like virtual reality or augmented reality, where they put on goggles and they pretended like they're jumping out of an airplane, or they're paragliding, or they're doing something else fun and exciting in the world that you do with Oculus goggles or other things. All of those applications today, the software is embedded in the device itself. And the reason for that is because of latency that I was referring to earlier, where if we put them on and the scene around us doesn't move in exactly real time, it makes us seasick, and it negates that sort of augmented or virtual reality experience. The wireless networks, as we go to 5G, will be so fast that you can't detect the latency inside of the wireless network. So what that means is that for applications, we can do augmented and virtual reality across the network. So in things like, it could be gaming in a more entertainment setting. It could be something like gaming, where you could do real-time gaming and do it with virtual reality or augmented reality. And it would be so fast that people separated by hundreds of miles, you couldn't tell that it wasn't real. In a more industrial application, it's a way of businesses who need highly skilled labor can use unskilled labor to accomplish skilled labor tasks. So if we take a technician and put glasses on them that instruct them as to how to do something, the glasses in virtual reality or augmented reality can then see what's happening real time and take an unskilled worker and show them what wire to switch, what to connect, where to connect it, what's the appropriate torque for a bolt, all kinds of things that could be done in real time that can be automated in order to do it. So some of the applications that are going to happen in the world are in that sphere of real-time application. What edge data centers do as a part of that is it's a location of putting compute power at the very edge of the network to increase the speed even faster than what can naturally occur in the network. So if you take an autonomous car driving and it's going down a freeway, there's some information that car is sensing and gathering that doesn't need to go all the way back to a large data center, because it's redundant to the car in front of it that indicated there was an obstruction in the middle of the road. If it's the same data, it doesn't need to travel all the way back in the network. So at the edge, if you put compute power, it can sort through what data needs to make the full run all the way back into the network and then come back with other information for other drivers, versus what information can be filtered at the edge of the network and increase the speed and reduce the latency to the users, which enables applications like what I was referring to.
Interesting. And CBRE?
Is a type of spectrum that's unlicensed. There's a component of it that's both licensed and unlicensed, and it enables companies that may not want to spend the money to own a nationwide network. Maybe they want to buy, maybe they want to deploy a wireless network on a college campus or on a corporate campus or in a particular geography around a shopping area or a park. The FCC enabled this CBRS network, enables them to be able to do it on a small scale without having to make as much upfront investment. It's good for us because it increases the number of customers that we have if ultimately some of those networks get built.
So it's interesting comparing you to some of the other tower REITs, your expansion away from just the mega towers has been to fiber and small cells. Some of the others, like American Tower, just bought a data center REIT, and they're, I think, focusing more internationally. How do you think about the strategy? Why not buy a data center REIT? Why not go international? Maybe your planning goes, I don't know.
Yeah, no, we're not planning to go internationally. We think the US wireless market is the best market in the world for investment, and it's a combination of both growth and low risk. So we think the US has the most attractive growth rates. There's two public peers, American Tower and SBA. SBA has about 15 to 20% of their revenues internationally in emerging markets, and American Tower is now getting close to about 50-50 international. They have more international assets than they do US domestic assets. We're focusing all of our capital in the US. The growth profile of the three companies, interestingly, while you would expect, in order to take the risk to go into emerging markets, you would expect higher growth rates. Our growth combined with our dividend yield is about 200 basis points higher than both of those two peers over the last 5 years. So what we found is a really attractive growth market in the US and at relatively low risk compared to any other opportunities that we have in the world. So we've concentrated the investment in the US and plan to continue to do so.
And expanding into other parts of the digital infrastructure like data centers, is that something you think about, or you just
certainly we've looked at it. I don't think it's a place where we're gonna play. It's not necessary. It's not a necessary component of the wireless network. It's a good business model, but we just don't think it fits our strategy of providing infrastructure to the wireless carriers, which is how we think we're gonna drive the vast majority of our growth. And so we focus the strategy on being that infrastructure provider to the wireless carriers.
In terms of threats to the business, are there technological concepts out there like satellites or these Wi-Fi balloons you read about that are a concern, or do you think the basic tower is going to be needed for a long time?
Yeah, I don't believe any of the balloons or the satellites are really a threat to us. They're complementary in really rural locations. They're also really helpful in disaster recovery situations. So there was obviously a massive hurricane that hit Puerto Rico several years ago, and we worked with others to deploy some balloons and satellites to stand up a network quickly until the terrestrial infrastructure could be rebuilt. And it's very effective in those kind of settings. It's also very effective in really rural locations where it's not cost effective to build a lot of terrestrial towers because there's not enough usage there. In some ways, it's a simple geography answer. If I take the data off of your phone and I move it to a tower and the tower is less than half a mile away from your device, it's going to be much faster than if I have to take your data, send it all the way to space, get an answer, send it back to space and back to your phone. It's never going to be a substitute for terrestrial infrastructure. It can work in those settings, though, of emergency situations. It can be helpful to reestablish a network, and it's helpful in rural locations where there's not a viable alternative.
So are more towers being built, or is there too much of a NIMBY problem and so on, so that you've basically got what you got?
We basically got what we got on the tower side. Supplementing that is the small cell build. So the vast majority of our capital spend, we're spending about $2 billion a year on investing in new assets. So as you mentioned earlier, $110 billion enterprise value. So about 2% roughly of the enterprise that we're building new assets, and virtually all of that capital investment is going towards small cells in the densification efforts around the network.
So places like Manhattan, I assume, are largely small cells. You don't see too many big towers around here.
Yeah, we're on the tops of many buildings there, and then we're building a lot of small cells, including Central Park. We built small cells in Central Park. That would be a fun Find Waldo project one afternoon when you're bored and run out of homework. You could walk around Central Park and see if you can find the small cells. They're located on the tops of lights and some other things where we've hidden them. But it's providing really robust coverage in Central Park.
I didn't realize it was you. I was actually commenting to someone the other day that the cell service in Central Park is unbelievably good. I now do a lot of business in Central Park because it's actually as good as working in the office.
That's a result of small cells that we built in Central Park.
Well, thank you. Ivan and Adam will be ready for you guys in a minute if you want to join. REIT status. So you became a REIT, I think, in 2014. Any issues that's created? This obviously brings a lot of complexity to the model, but is it worth it? You're happy as a REIT?
We are happy as a REIT. That was a fun project to work on. At the time, I was CFO during our REIT conversion, and we had talked about. I've been at Crown for a little over 20 years, and had talked about. We had collectively talked about converting to a REIT for years because we were basically a real estate business and thought that was the best and most efficient structure long term for shareholders. And so, as the business got to a place of maturing more, we went through the process of converting to a REIT. I wouldn't say it was painless, but it took some explanation and process that we went through in terms of making parallels to more traditional real estate, but found the process to be relatively straightforward. And we got it done from start to finish in about 12 to 15 months. That's what it took us to make that conversion. And we've been happy. Obviously, we're a huge REIT ourselves, and American Tower, I think, are the two largest current REITs, and so we make up a huge portion of the enterprise value in the REIT space. The two companies do, and I've enjoyed a great partnership with NAREIT and our other friends that are REIT businesses. A lot of common thinking. You know, one of the great things about REITs is that the owners of those businesses and the CEOs of the businesses, the CFOs, think a lot about returns on capital. And ultimately, any REIT business is just a provider of capital to their customers. And so ensuring that we get the lowest cost of capital enables us to provide to our customers a lower cost than it would be if they owned it themselves. That's, you know, the basic tenet. And in our case, our customers, our tenants, are the wireless operators, and we're providing a lower cost of capital to them to deploy their infrastructure than what they could do themselves. So it's cheaper for Verizon to use us than to deploy their own, and that lower cost of capital, I think, is one of the tenets of being a REIT, and we've certainly found that to be true.
It is extraordinary, the growth of not just the tower REITs, but the other tech-driven REITs, which is, I mean, for the students out there, is one of the reasons we wanted to expose you to this. I think if you go back 10, 15 years, all of the biggest REITs were malls, office REITs, et cetera. I think if you include the industrial REITs, which are really logistics, kind of tech-driven REITs, I think 5 out of the 10 biggest REITs now are tech-driven REITs, either digital infrastructure, you guys, the towers, the data centers. It's quite a change. And based on your this talk, I mean, that 45% utility, that you still have 55% to grow organically without building another tower is I hadn't understood that statistic until this call. That's amazing organic growth ahead of you. So you guys are probably going to continue to dominate the REIT space.
We hope to continue to see the growth. And, you know, from speaking to the students on this topic, I think this is one of the best things about being in the business. I would tend towards, I grew up on the financial side. As I mentioned, I was CFO for 8 years prior to becoming CEO. So I enjoy the financial aspects of the business, but I also love to learn, and a natural curiosity around technology and where the world is headed. And being in the tech space, the digital data centers would have this component, towers would have this component. And this is a fun place to learn about where the world is going and what is next in the world. That makes working for a technology-driven REIT a lot of fun. And at the same time, it's really grounded. I mean, we're not a techie company that you would think of in terms of Silicon Valley, that's going to go through a series of time where it's in favor and then falls out of favor. We're a necessary component of the network, so you get all the benefits of learning about what's next, and at the same time you get You get the benefits of the more traditional aspects of real estate, of stable, predictable, long-term growth and returns on assets.
Yeah, yeah. So speaking of the students, Ivan, you had a couple of questions?
Yes, my question was, in what ways, if any, did the recently passed infrastructure bill impact digital infrastructure and Crown Castle's business?
Yeah, thanks, Ivan. Good question. It is going to impact outside of the major US markets. It is going to provide some funding to companies who are going to try to build broadband access for all. And some of those companies will use wireless technologies in order to get into the home to provide that infrastructure. So it's more helping our customers, which results in their ability to have capital to then invest in and go on some of our sites. And it'll happen particularly in places that are outside the top 100, top 150 markets in the US, in places that are more rural, but I would describe as more small towns in the US where we're likely to see some benefit in revenues from that funding.
And another question I had was, will rising interest rates impact digital infrastructure the same as traditional property types?
Probably not. In the case of our business, the largest single operating expense line item is the ground leases. So we own 40% of the land underneath our towers, and we lease 60% of them. Those leases are beyond 30 years in average length. They're about 35 years. And almost all of the escalators are fixed in nature. On the revenue side of our business, the leases are very long. So the customers commit to going on the assets for 10 to 15 years initially. They have rights to stay on the assets for 30 to 35 years total. And the pricing is fixed on those for that entire period of time. So if you look at our both revenue growth and our margin, if you go all the way down to margin, it's not impacted by inflationary pressures because we're basically fixed in cost and revenue components. Now, there's a what's the asset worth question that happens in the market in inflationary periods of time, but we don't have risk at the revenue line or opportunity at the revenue line or risk or opportunity at the expense line like more traditional real estate would have. We don't see, said another way, we don't see tenant churn like what you see in a traditional office setting. When a customer goes on our site, they basically stay in perpetuity. They don't go to, in an office building, when the lease is up, people explore new headquarters, new office space. That doesn't happen because of the technology aspect of the business. Once they're on the asset, they basically stay there forever.
Thank you.
And in terms of what, I don't know if Adam has questions. Adam, you can join if you do. In terms of effect on cap rates and what's the asset worth, I assume you're not really selling any of your towers. So, or are you? But are you actively buying more? Are there still more to buy? Or are they basically owned by the three big REITs with very little on the private side?
Yeah, that's something somewhat unique about our business is you don't see assets trade very often. So we don't take any assets. I don't think we've ever sold. We sold countries. We sold off the UK. We sold off Australia years and years ago. But we don't take components of the network or the towers and sell pieces of them. We do acquire assets from time to time, but most of the assets have been acquired into the hands of the three big operators, public companies. So there's not a lot of M&A activity.
Do you see some consolidation among the three, or maybe kind of like what American Tower did with the data center REIT? Do you see M&A happening in the future, or it's pretty stable?
It's possible, but the scale of the companies are pretty large also. I think SBA is north of $50 billion in terms of enterprise value. American and ourselves both north of $100 billion. So it's rare for those size companies to trade. So I think we've probably got a relatively stable market structure among those companies.
Got it. Well, Jay, looks like we're out of time. I can't thank you enough. That was a fascinating whirlwind, and that whirlwind tour through the space, and that 45% really gives should give us all something to think about. Is that fully understood in the market?
I think so. I mean, I think most of our investors would see the business as the growth as being more organic than it is built. From time to time, though, everybody asks that question around, okay, well, are you full? Like the run's been great. What do you have to do in order to continue to grow? And I think it's one of the most compelling aspects of the business. So thanks for having me today, though. It's always great to be with you. And certainly I'm on LinkedIn. So if students want to reach out, make a connection, and you're looking for a career in a REIT business, we're always looking for great people to join us. So I'll use the last couple of seconds to plug that. And we'd love to have some NYU students join Crown Castle.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Talk
See you
soon.
soon. Take
Thank
care.
you.